Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you're calling in from around the world. And welcome to V2020, our Intrinsic Values and Gifts, the Goddess Archetype, with world-renowned speakers on this topic, Drs. Jean Shinoda Bolen and Carmen Boulter. Happy Earth Day. And in a moment, you'll hear why we thought that it was important to host this call today and point out our relationship and responsibilities to honor and protect our precious planet. You are calling in from 21 countries, it looks like. So welcome. Isn't amazing, right? So if you would just take a moment at the bottom of your screen, find your chat window and just say, hello from Italy, hello from Brazil, hello from Spain, Morocco, Serbia, wherever you're calling in from. Just sit, let us know you're here, and it'll, we'll look forward to welcoming you in our after party. My name is Sandy Hart, and I am a member of the V2020 Task Force. And I'm also an ambassador for the Women and Girls sector of the Charter for Compassion. We're a global network inspiring cities of compassion and thousands of partners organized into 12 sectors and in 56 countries. We're all focused on promoting the principle of compassion and their unique work and projects. On behalf of the V2020 Task Force, I welcome you to this third webinar in our series of V2020. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Brenda Gustin, and then I'll disappear, and Brenda will introduce our guests. After their conversation, you'll all be brought into the after party, like I just mentioned, and that's where you can ask your questions and you can exchange with one another and our speakers. And but before we move into our call, again, maybe by now you have found your chat window. Here come the welcomes and the hellos. How wonderful. Thank you. So no doubt you'll be hearing an awful lot of wisdom today. So no need to take notes. If you have questions in the chat box, you can point out some things and or ask some questions, but do know that in the after party, your voice can also be heard. This call is recorded, so no need to take copious notes, because again, you'll be hearing an awful lot that you might want to remember, but just know it'll be recorded and a recording will be sent to you. I want to take this time to welcome and thank our V2020 Task Force to the call too. Betsy Spano, Brenda Gustin, Sarah Jamil, Donna Mills, and particularly Joan Marie, who in 2015 shared with me her wish to acknowledge 2020 as a critically important year marking the 100th anniversary of the United States 19th Amendment, which is the women's right to vote and some other privileges, and more notably, the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day Proclamation. This is a document that firmly calls for a new paradigm of justice and the great and general interest of peace. This is the actual meaning of the Mother's Day history, and it is actually threaded through our entire V2020 series. Joan told me that she knew this year would also require us to take a serious look and longer strides, as she says, to make the profane profound again. That is something you can write down. So now it's my delight to introduce you to Brenda. Brenda Gustin, PhD, is a writer, speaker, educator, healer, facilitator, friend, sister, founder of Union with the Heart, mother, grandmother, should have led with that, sorry, and co-director of Radiant Health Center. Brenda is also a co-founder of Compassionate Capital Region and serves Mercy Springs Foundation, Chill Sacramento, the Shift Network, the Ananda Worldwide, and also the Advisory Council for the Women's Interfaith Group, SARA, Spiritual and Religious Alliance for Hope. So now it's my delight and honor to hand the call over to Brenda.
Thank you, Sandy, so very much. Welcome to everyone here. I'm going to bring up a view that I can see everyone. Well, it is such an honor and privilege for me to be here on behalf of the V2020 team, and I would like to introduce Jean Shinoda Bolen and Dr. Carmen Boulter. So Jean Shinoda Bolen, MD, is a psychiatrist, Jungian analyst, and internationally known author and speaker. She's the author of 13 books, perhaps more in case she recently published one, which I'm not aware of, in over 100 foreign editions. She's an NGO permanent representative to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women from the Women's World Summit Foundation, Geneva, Women's Perspective, and the International Public Policy Institute. She is in 3 acclaimed documentaries, the Academy Award-winning anti-nuclear proliferation film, Women for America, for the World, the Canadian Film Board's Goddess Remembered, and FEM, Women Healing the World. Thanks to Sandy and my dear friend Joan, I was able to meet Jean at the Parliament of World Religions my first time, and then at the UN gatherings. And then Dr. Carmen Boulter, I had the pleasure of meeting at CPAC last year and had a delightful conversation and watched her courage as she stood on stage for women. She's a University of Calgary professor, author, and researcher, director, producer, and writer of the Pyramid Code. A professor of the University of Calgary in Canada, Dr. Boulter is the creative fire behind the Pyramid Code, directing, producing, and writing the series. She's been researching and writing about the sacred feminine in ancient Egypt and in goddesses worldwide for 2 decades. Her book, Angels and Archetypes, an evolutionary map of feminine consciousness, traces fragments of information about matriarchal cultures in pre-dynastic Egypt, prehistoric Greece, and around the world. In the archives of the Egyptian Museum, she gained official access to the original field notes of excavations done around the pyramids in the early 1900s. Dr. Boulter has an unshakable passion for Egypt and has traveled there 34 times.
Wow.
36 now.
Wow.
And is it 35 now, Carmen? Because you just got off the Nile?
36, yeah.
36, yeah. She just came, both of them also, we just found out, were in Egypt in March. And so they both were there at around the same time. So as you know, we here want to learn and feel the essence of your wisdom to gain that internal awakening power within us. And Earth Day is such a great day for us to awaken that and to hear from you what goddess archetypes that we can, you know, tune into on a deeper level and then bring those to the fore to step into that power from courage and strength and love. And to begin that, I would like to read the original Mother Day Proclamation by Julia Ward Howe.
1870, right?
Yes, 1870.
It was right after the Civil War ended, something like that.
Yeah. And what she was doing was she was working to establish Mother's Peace Day.
Ah.
Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of council. Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead. Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace, each honoring after his own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God. In the name of womanhood and of humanity, I earnestly ask that a general Congress of women, without limit of nationality, may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient and at the earliest period consistent with its objects, to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international questions, and the great and general interests of peace. Ah,
Yeah.
amazing. So many of us know that Jean is gathering women, has been for many, many years, and Carmen has been doing the same in different ways, and not only women. And yet we're moving forward to, Jean is congregating women in India in 2022. So that's one action that's taking place. The B2020 team, what we would like to do is move through a thread in our conversation here and asking about how best do we develop the intrinsic nature of the goddess archetype in our life now to speak from the bosom of the devastated earth and be heard without creating more violence. And are there particular goddess archetypes that you suggest will help us in this?
Oh, Brenda, we are in the middle of a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that's happening is sheltering in place, where circles online are forming all over. And the idea of when you meet in a circle, it's not hierarchical. And you are experiencing that everyone who speaks up in the moment, a child, grandparent, father, mother, whoever is speaking has, as we are doing right now, whoever is speaking has the video right now, and everyone is equal in the circle that Zoom is creating for us. So that the circle movement, without having a name, is moving through the culture during this pandemic sheltering in place. And the circle and the form is a very feminine form. And it is a one that is inherent in our brains as well as in our psyche. And a woman's brain has a bigger tendon befriend part of it. I think this is an amazing transformative time. And so when you ask about goddesses, I think about the patterns in us that are actually in we come in with natural instincts or talents or affinities, and it's called out often by what's possible in the outer world. So, you know, families suppress certain things and invite certain things. Well, what's happening now is there's an invitation for the feminine, the tend and befriend quality in people, but it's inherently larger in women. And there are the feminine face of God or goddess has many, many different names. I happen to write about ones based on the Greek goddesses, but they don't have names. They are inherently in us. And this period of time is inviting that goddess archetype, that feminine sense of divinity, that sense of holiness, connectedness. It's moving in us.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Carmen, would you like to?
Well, I think that matriarchal cultures lived in balance, and many people think that that means that women will control men. No, that's not what the word matriarchy means in my mind. And I think that the problems that we're seeing on the planet of power over, power grabs, hierarchy, me, mine, greed, profit-based instead of humanity-based, co-opting lies, repetition on the media, and lots of ways that we're being brainwashed, really, is the epitome of the last stages of patriarchy. Blood from life, menstrual blood, was the most important thing in matriarchal cultures because it was considered the highest form of DNA, and women would get together in a dream time and go to the menstrual hut and collect their menstrual blood and then use it in ritual. Well, then when the patriarchs took over, they decided blood from death was the same thing. Well, we know that it's not. And any woman who's given birth is not going to go and kill someone else's child very easily. And I think that the women who would succumb to that have become women in men's suits. So they're acting in a patriarchal way. And we are at a crisis because the balance of values, the values of the feminine, have been denigrated and lopped off. And even in Greek mythology, once the patriarchy started to take over, they didn't need a womb anymore. So, you know, Zeus had a headache and bonked his head with an axe and out popped Athena, etc. Right? And so this idea of procreation envy is very, very strong, but it led to a real fall and a real building up of ego. And so part of that is narcissism. And so even social media is breeding narcissism, and we only have to care about ourselves. We don't have to care about anybody else. And in this, what we're seeing in the situation on the planet right now is completely divisive. Who's against who? You know, well, we don't have as many restrictions as you have in Spain, so therefore we're better than you. But really, as Jean was saying, we are all together. We are all experiencing the same thing in 190 countries or whatever. And it's not being promoted. The propaganda isn't here with us in the same way. And so I see one of the real problems is the media and even Hollywood. You know, there's a new movie that came out last week called Out of the Shadows, and it's looking at all the ways that these messages and programming have come upon us. And if we're not really vigilant and conscious, we buy it. We just go along with it. Fear of each other. If you don't have a mask, you're endangering other people and all of this. And it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense as far as I can see. So this is what we need. And I think we need bigger forums to be able to live this, be this. So the whole idea is surrendering the lower self to the higher self so that we're working consciously. And that's what, you know, understanding the archetypes within ourselves is about. So the lower self is the ego, is the everything I said before, me, mine, self-importance and all of that. But the higher self is the place where we join.
And the reason that I bring up the goddesses and the archetypes is sometimes when people then read a story about the mythological and which ties in with the history, then it helps us to recall into the mind and reawaken that connection that we all have through our DNA structure, so that we come from a birthing and a remembering within our very cellular nature, so that it comes from the heart of every single cell. And so we know it. You know, it's not about having to learn it. It's about us rebirthing it. And that's why I am so tuned into what women, rather than, like you said, Carmen, wearing the suits of the men and trying to duplicate what the hierarchy has created. How do we reawaken that knowing of the matriarch, of the divine, and this is within men and women too, because the divine feminine and the divine masculine is in all of us. How do we bring those two together and birth it? Yet in working with men, I've noticed that their power, intrinsic power, is like a sonic boom. Whereas women, because we have that tendon befriend ability, we are able to expand the tunnel, basically, or the space, so that then that power just resounds. And so how do we embody that as women deep down and really come from that and trust and knowing? Because so many women, we've been put down and said, oh, you're so emotional, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 those, we've all been in that place. And so as I've studied the goddesses and archetypes, it's helped me to tune into the vibrational field of those, so that then, it's that reawakening that comes through the body. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I know that, Jean, you've been talking about Artemis and the indomitable spirit of all women, and how do, as prolific as both of you are, there's a lot of women that do not know this work.
Well, one of the ways of appreciating the energy of Gaia, the Greeks did begin with, in the beginning was Gaia, the first presentation of life was our planet, our mother, the earth. And so the whole sense of naturally at the beginning, the whole sense of birth is rather miraculous. And yet it's also part of nature. And the feminine of all species brings new life into the world. And as long as nature was valued, and women were valued, and birthing was valued, and being able to nurture a child, our mother, the earth, and a woman's body giving birth to a baby and then suckling that baby, it's the same as what Gaia does for the whole planet. And one of the fascinating things right now is, as we shelter in place, for the first time since, well, for the first time in decades, the planet is clean again. The people in India can see the Himalayas for the first time from below, because the pollution over New Delhi is gone. Over New York, it's gone. And I remember in the 60s when the astronauts brought us the image of Earth from outer space, how beautiful she was. And this is Gaia, this is our mother. And as we destroy our forests and nature, we're doing in our mother, the earth, and our connection, our feeling that we're all part of a oneness, that rather than power over hierarchy. So this is the image of circle. It's the image of the goddess that connects with nature. And this was Artemis. This was also Artemis that is the eternal Girl Scout there in women, who likes to go out in nature and who feels comfortable with sisters. Not all women do. Right. There are differences in us, like there are talents in us. But we all have a little bit of everything that is human. And to what's happening now, you can walk out in nature, but you have to be 6 feet apart. And so you actually are in a more meditative with nature state of mind. I think there's some wonderful transformations that may be happening in individuals right now as we shelter and experience our own inner life, because only in silence do we connect with certain parts of ourselves.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to comment on Artemis too, because she's considered a virgin goddess, and yet in some depictions, she's shown with breasts all over the front of her, and yet she's not a mother. But this idea of being able to nurture and what comes from that, and even if we think of Knossos on Crete, how the feminine figures have their breasts exposed, and that's not considered, you know, poor taste like it is now. And that's the same in Egypt with the bare-breasted woman. And in terms of Gaia, the archetype of Gaia, as I understand it, is the mother that we're not separated from. And most of us have not been well parented. Many of us have not been well parented. And, you know, the idea of the too good mother or the good enough mother, but we all have to individuate from our birth mothers. But the mother, the archetypal mother that we're not separate from is Gaia. And part of the separation, patriarchy, and the damage to the planet is separation from nature, is disassociation with Gaia. And that has brought us all kinds of problems. And she will heal very quickly if we leave her alone and let her heal. So it's wonderful to observe that.
Thank you.
Saying something more about Artemis. Artemis was the firstborn of twins, and her mother had the worst labor in Greek mythology, and goddesses are not like us. So shortly after Artemis was born, she was midwife to her mother to deliver her brother Apollo. So Artemis is goddess of the hunt and goddess of the moon, and her brother Apollo is god of the sun in Greek mythology. But they're equals in the sense that they're siblings. And when culture changes from patriarchy to we are all one family and siblings, there's a natural egalitarian quality that is happening now, at least in the United States and in many Western countries. Women are rising, and it's up to us individually to bond and to rise. The whole idea of women rising, bringing up the sense of the feminine and speaking with an equal voice that isn't the same as the male voice, but is complementary. And this is sort of what is potentially happening now.
Yes, I agree.
And Artemis is the egalitarian archetype. And it's a part of in women that stays virginal. It's sort of like a virgin forest. It's not logged. It's a separate part of in us that even within patriarchy, that part of us stays virginal, as in virgin forest, unworked upon, the essential feminine that connects with nature.
And you said something there, Jean, too, about the complementary. That's a term that I've really been paying more attention to, because so many people in decades have been taught to compromise. And recognizing that we complement each other, that we don't oppose each other. And how can I add into the circle? And that's what circle, work is based on. And that's what, that tending and nurturing that we're talking about, the mother being able to do that, to care for all. The thing that has happened is women so often give themselves away, and is not from overflow, because they don't necessarily care for themselves. And one of the things that I wanted to ask here too was, how do we gather? Julia Ward Howe talks about the irrelevant agencies. And so how do we gather together, wherever we are, in support of each other, to stand up, to be heard, not like we're harping, not like we're some kind of a complaining individual. We're stating facts. We all know that oftentimes women are named something different when they stand in their power and their truth. And the names aren't necessarily flattering the identities. So how do we really, what I've recognized is when we stand true to ourselves and trust ourselves and in the entire body, then we can stand up to those irrelevant agencies and not allow them to govern our personal choices. And so again, how do you see us as women standing in that place, in the different locations that we are, and speak from that truth? How do we really manifest that?
I'll take that one first, if you don't mind.
I
I think of the goddess Mot, and she happens to be right behind me here, and she's got the feather of truth. And the idea, though, is that if there's no ears to hear, there's nothing much to say. So I think when we're speaking into the void or into the cannot hear you, our voices won't be heard no matter how centered we are, how truthful we are. But we are living in the post-truth era. And every year, the dictionary has to add new words, like mouse based on computer mouse and that sort of thing. But a couple of years ago, the word was post-truth. Because in patriarchy, if you don't get caught, it's not wrong. But without the feather of truth and the balance, we're absolutely lost. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're lost without truth. So in the Egyptian tradition, there would be the ceremony of the weighing of the heart. And when a person passed, in particular after the 18th dynasty, when they started mummification, they would pull the brain out and throw it away because they didn't think that was the seat of intelligence, but the heart was. So when you pass to the other side, Anubis would say you're dead, and Thoth would say let's have your heart, and they would weigh it against the feather of truth. And so if your heart was heavy because you had crossed someone, hurt someone, maimed someone, killed someone, they didn't want you on the other side. And so we've departed from that. We are used to being lied to all day long. And that's what media and Hollywood does. And they even show people on TV, how are you? Fine, but you've just seen them in a crisis. You know, we're trained how to lie, and we're indoctrinated into how to accept lies. So Brenda, when you say we need to live our truth and be in our truth and let it resonate and be in our deep knowing that we know that we know, that doesn't mean that everyone will hear us.
Right.
So we need to be in the company of people who, in the circle, who have open ears, who have a balance of speaking and listening and the idea of the talking stick. So, and you know, Zoom offers the talking stick, you know, to the person who's speaking by giving the video to them, and that's a beautiful metaphor. So without truth, we really don't have too much.
Thank you. So true. You're telling. And that truth, I observe that my truth isn't necessarily your truth, and vice versa. And when we don't chop it up and segregate it by the activity of the brain, then that's okay. Because harmony of the spheres comes from the fact that we are different and yet the same. Because we can all, like the story of the elephant, you know, we can all sit in this room and we're all going to gather different things because of the collection of our ancestral knowing inside of us. So we have a different perspective, and that's the beauty of harmony. It doesn't.
But asking someone, how is it that you came upon this truth? How has that worked for you? And really listening. Why do you think what you think? How do you think what you think? But the more that someone's in their ego or in a narcissistic standpoint, they never ask any questions. They're just right. And they just want to make you wrong and make themselves right. But that's a low level of consciousness. But still, it doesn't allow for an exchange and a harmony, which is, you know, more than one note on a scale, right? A chord, a chord.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Thank you for bringing that up, because that is the listening. That's the circle of placing something in the middle and allowing the pause, right? So that the
It's,
heartbeat comes.
yeah. That's the indigenous model that we are reconnecting with, and that valued our mother, the earth, and our father, the sky, and we are all one together. And in the realm of the bigger psyche that we each have, there's the ego. But in Jungian terms, there is this larger archetype that the ego can be in relationship to, which is the self. But the self can be defined as we do over time, as God, as goddess, as Tao, as all that is, the universe. And one of the things about going to Egypt is to see how you can have crocodile-headed gods, and you can have, you know, we can say all of these people that came before us, they've worshipped all of these images and names of God, goddesses that are foreign to us. But that's just because we come into the world with a natural connection with divinity. And over time, religion takes over that and says we have the exclusive right to name it and to say you're in or you're out. But every one of us comes into the world with a sense of what's sacred and divine, and it doesn't have a name. So when you form it in a circle and you drop into it, what you do is you drop down out of the ego into the larger, call it the self, call it the field, and there you are connected with something deeper in yourself. And I think that this is that only we are an authority on what makes us joyful, what makes us so absorbed in what we are doing that we lose track of time. Then we know we are aligned with the archetypes in us, and the archetypes in people differ. So who we are aligns with that particular archetype, like a talent that we came into the world with. And then if we allow ourselves to live from who we came to be, in a sense, I mean, I think it's not just the talents that we came in with, but it's also the time we came into. And so this is what I think is so important about bringing up the proclamation and the sense of calling women together, because I think that really, if the planet is the planet's going to make it, but are we going to make it?
Right.
And if we save the trees, I mean, it's trees and women and the planet together, the sense of oneness that may be developing now in this liminal time. A liminal time is between where we used to be, we can't go back, and what will happen next, we don't know yet.
Right.
But look at all of the individuals that are actually spending time inside themselves, all the individuals that are taking walks in nature 6 feet apart from other people, connecting with nature. This is something that is affecting people, and we don't know yet how we're all going to come through this and what goddess archetypes will emerge.
I think it's interesting that Isis is a triple goddess, virgin, mother, and crone. And she's the grieving goddess who lost her sweetheart Osiris. And that name was co-opted, you know, by the warring folk that were going ISIL and then ISIS. But at the end of the dynastic period of Egypt, the temples of Isis surrounded the entire Mediterranean basin, and the northern part the top part of the Mediterranean became Christian and the bottom part became Muslim. But a lot of Christian churches were put over temples of Isis, and just down the way, less than an hour away, is a Roman market town with an official temple of Isis. And so I don't think that these sorts of ways that they take the names and try to, you know, associate something different with them is an accident. And Isis teaches us an awful lot about the connection to the cosmos, but particularly how to grieve. And in our world, you're supposed to grieve without crying. You know, somebody passes, you just have to get over it on a certain time frame. But we've also wiped out the idea of going back into being rebirthed into the arms of the cosmic mother when we pass. And that's, you know, a different kind of birthing, going back. And there's something about the way we negotiate and move between different realms that was completely natural to the ancient Egyptians that we've lost.
Yes. And wasn't it Osiris's body was
in pieces?
In pieces. And I think that, you know, something just sparked in me what Jean was talking about with the trees, and then you bringing up Isis, and, you know, Osiris, his parts being placed in different areas. There's other stories about that from the Indian tradition as well. And I wonder if those also metaphorically represent, such as there are trees that are different. Somebody on our call mentioned not all notes create harmony, and that's true. There's the disharmony that takes place where then there's a pause and a shift that can take place for a rebirthing. If you take Osiris's parts or you look at the trees, there's groves of trees, there's trees that stand alone, meaning each aspect is different and yet a part of. When we honor that, rather than attack it, and I feel like that's what the brain tends to do, is it segregates, whereas the heart, and you're talking about how the heart was coveted, it is whole, and it actually connects to every single cell in the body and informs the brain.
There are some brain cells, by the way, in the heart.
Yes.
Neurons in the heart. But the brain is divided into two halves, and then it's joined at the base. And ever since patriarchy and the written word came in and dominated, we have had cultures that develop the left side of the brain, which is an either or. It's a linear. It's a linear part of us. And when that part is dominant, as it is in Western cultures and patriarchy in general, then right and everything is in the right, wrong, upper, lower perspective. Now the other side, which is sometimes considered the more feminine side of the brain, it can hold dichotomies, parables, metaphors. It's able to think, feel in image forms and metaphors, and so it's when you join the two halves of the brain together, and it connects to the body, the heart, and all the chakras, then you have a human being that is connected to all parts of himself or herself.
Right.
And women's brains are actually physiologically a bit different than most men's brains, and whether it's just because of the cultural shifts over time but anyway, right now, women's brains are in general more symmetrical, right and left brain, because we've been educated as well. So we have the left brain, but the other side is there. So wouldn't you rather have whole brain people making decisions?
Yes.
That you could do both, feeling and thinking. Anyway, it's an interesting it's an interesting time for women to step into the need to help the circles of families and organizations and cultures and nations to connect and stay connected rather than try to be separate and dominant over.
Yes, and Jean, what you're saying there, back to Julia Ward Howe, she talks about the alliance of the different nationalities, amicable settlement of international questions, all in the interest of peace. A woman, the womb, which is, I see as the center of that circle, and it's not only that women have a womb, because men all came from there. It's, I think, anatomically, it's more difficult for them to connect because they don't have it inside of them. They only came from there. So whether they can recall, remember where they came from, and how do we encompass and speak from that place of honoring our own selves as the birthing place, and recall that this is our home. This is our earthly home, is the womb, whether you be man or woman, whether your body has been, you know, changed, or you identify as differently than what your outer appearance looks like. And again, that's that whole outer appearance, letting go of that. When we get all down, one of the things that, Carmen, you might speak to is in the tombs, you know, what's left is the bones. And it's like the bones in Hermetic science are identified as the beliefs. And so it's like, how do we recognize that our belief systems, our structure is where we have learned and grown, but that doesn't mean that one side of the coin isn't part of the same coin. So how do we take those intrinsic values and bring them out together to create peace in our own selves first?
Well, let's extend that a little bit, because it's the bones and the teeth. And one of the interviews in the New Atlantis that I'm just finishing the editing on now is Dr. Stephen Lynn, that talks about anthropologically, that's what we've got left is bones and teeth. And in the metaphysical causation, teeth are decisions. But it's also able to trace if we've lived in harmony or not. And we've never had more people that need braces, children with crooked teeth and breathing improperly. And if you look at the ancient, the farther back you go and the more matriarchal and harmonious a culture is, the better their teeth and their bones are. And so, and older is deeper in archaeology. So the real essential matriarchal cultures are going to be deeper. And the gift of Maria Gimbutas was going deeper and deeper, and then finding things that represented matriarchal cultures that were more in balance. So I think it's important to include that too.
Thank you very much. That's so true. Very true. And then the root system in the teeth and how that relates to the body. Most of this knowledge is not known. And the more that this comes out, the intrinsic nature of who we really are as human beings, bringing that into the circles of knowing, expanding that trust in our own bodies. Hermetic science is about how the fact that we are hermetically sealed. Every single answer is inside of us. And, you know, Jean, you've been talking about, we don't know right now how people are changing. And it's beautiful. And many people are talking about how do we look forward to getting back to normal. And then, of course, people are talking about the new normal. And I wonder if both of you could talk about, is there an archetype, goddess or not, that you can see that perhaps people could step into, do a little study on, to how we step back out into the world right now and embrace and love the Mother Earth and speak differently and act differently?
Well, in Angels and Archetypes,
go ahead.
In Angels and Archetypes, the idea is that we have to encompass all of the archetypes, and it follows numerology, archaeology, and astrology and tarot. But the whole idea is if we drop one, we become complex. And if we're only being run by one, we're also complex. So one gets driven into the shadow and the other one is running us. So isolating one archetype, I don't think is the answer. I think it's being able to have the whole spectrum of every piece of it. Now, when you say the knowledge is hidden, unknown, forgotten, well, that was an agenda. I think, and I've been saying this for a long time, the agenda of the patriarchy has been to erase evidence of everything other than itself. So in my multiple decades of research for angels and archetypes, there were little fragments of things that were left. But, you know, during patriarchy, if you believed in tarot or even reincarnation, they would kill you. So we have this cellular memory of fear with these sorts of things that make us whole. But patriarchy's only really been 6,000 years. You know, the peaceable tribes and the no weapons and all of that is pretty much the rest of it. But the focus has been on the last 6,000 years, 6,000 years, which is what the Quran, the Bible, school, everything is trying to tell us. That's the whole thing. There's always been war. The patriarchy is when the soldiers came and there was another time. So this modeling of synthesis, what we need is a model for an empowered humanity. That is everything we've been talking about. Accepting each other, listening to each other, and coming from a place of honoring instead, you know, being together instead of separating and being apart. So the irony in our liminal state, as Jean mentioned, and we are liminal because we're not going back where we were and we don't know where we're going. And that was a Jungian term to be in the middle, right? Subliminal is the part that we're not aware of, like archetypes. If you're not conscious of the archetype, that doesn't mean it's not there. You just don't connect with how it works in you. And the whole thing is about consciousness. So can we increase our consciousness? But what I was going to say is in separating us in an interesting way, we're coming together. And there's been quite a few meditations, notably 11 in the morning and 11 at night, wrapping itself around the planet. There was one on the 444 day and the portals. And it seems by joining each other in silence in a cosmic sense, we have more of a chance of shifting things. And the 1111 meditations are visualizing a world of peace and prosperity as we would like it. And that's not going to include what they're doing, power over war, profit, money, you know, never mind about the earth, you know, all of that, you know, it just doesn't work. And it's come to such a threshold, you know, where people are actually suffering with this. You know, there's lots of reasons why this isn't ideal for loads and loads of people. And suicide's going up and domestic abuse is going up. Like this is a really challenging situation. And in some ways we've been warned about it for decades. And now we're in it. But to find our true selves and to find each other in silence, to find our real humanity alone is really what you were saying, Brenda. And that's a very spiritual construct.
Thank you, Carmen.
Carmen is reminding me of my own sort of genealogy of learning about Goddess and learning, because I come in, like most of us, in patriarchy with the patriarchal religion. But regardless of what is theologically taught you, there is the larger self that has come through the ages, in which humanity and each human has a sense that there is something greater than ourselves. There is a divinity. There is something sacred about the world we're in. And as soon as we experience that, one of the things is we stop being delusional about how wonderful human beings are as a species, and we are humbled that we have a certain gift, a perception of divinity, a history that we can write down. We come in with being part of this whole Gaia, the earth, and every living thing on it, but we happen to have something called consciousness that Carmen is bringing up to contribute to this planet. And in this liminal time, that's maybe what we can do now in time to save the planet and not be obliterated as a failed experience. Humanity had the possibility of unifying things and connecting each other with each other. And did we make it? Will we lose it? And in this liminal time, I mean, my genealogy is remembering Merlin Stone's When God Was a Woman, Maria Gimbutas, the archaeologist, who revealed to me and others who read at the time our own genealogy, that it isn't the genealogy that came out of Adam's rib and that we are therefore inferior to men. We had a grounding that said, wait. Long before the theology came in, there were religions and there was a mother goddess, and there was a natural sense that the creator was feminine, because we have watched all life coming out of the body of the feminine or out of the earth itself. So we needed to regain a memory of what it's like to be female, feminine, human, and recognize that this is a distinctive quality that we can be respected for and respect ourselves. And I think that is part of, then came the political equality of the 60s and 70s. And now we are in this liminal time, which I think of as the birth canal, that whenever women give birth, you lose track of ordinary time because there's no such thing as ordinary time. And once the baby starts to come through you, you can't stop. And you are totally in the grip of the moment. And you go through the birth canal, the baby goes through the birth canal, and mother and child are in danger. The baby can go under the pubic bone and maybe it won't make it. But if it goes through the birth canal at the right time, head first, then what's interesting is that it emerges out of an unconscious place in the womb into the world. It's a reality that every human being has lived through, who's still here. And it's a metaphor for humanity as a whole. That we are now in this sheltering in place time when there is a global consciousness, a global connection. If in the silence of sheltering in place, we have a sense that we are part of the whole matrix that is humanity. And when we shelter in place, we are looking out for others, not just ourselves. We're part of something bigger. So will we get through this liminal time? And interestingly, the coronavirus, because I was a medical student intern before I was a psychiatrist, I like to be on the receiving end of delivering babies. And as soon as you saw that the passage was safe, you saw the head of the baby, and it was called, the baby is crowning, which is corona, which is, here we are. The coronavirus maybe is doing something wonderful for humanity. Maybe there's a new something going through the birth canal that we're in, and maybe we don't know. This is where we are.
We are definitely crowning at this point, aren't we? And the term ascending is being used by many people too, and I'm sure all the people on this call have knowledge, consciousness of what that means. Yet there are many that don't. They don't know the cycle of the ages, the 24,000 years, all of that. And I won't go into that yet. As we go into the after party that we have with this webinar, I'm just wondering if you might contemplate and speak about how do we, as we're birthed back out into our societies, is there one recommendation or a couple that you might say that we can, how we can be, just something that comes to you. What is it that we could be, that you feel this has affected you, that how we could behave differently?
Well, I'm thinking about this social distancing and how we're social beings. And I've been doing a lot of research on the fallacies of what we're being told, and that touching each other, and it's called herd immunity, that if, just like the regular flu, when kids are in school together, that by isolating us, that's actually not the way to do it. And by breathing in a mask, we're affecting our respiratory system. And so it's politicians that are making these decisions, not doctors and people who stand to make money. But really, we're social beings. We need to hug, we need to kiss each other, and the greeting in Europe, and as we're kissing each other, and then you're the enemy. And what this has done is it's made everybody seem dangerous to one another. But we have to rise above that.
Yeah.
And so there's certain people who are saying, oh, well, when it's over, I'm still going to wear a mask everywhere I go. And I said, well, if we go for a beer, are you going to sit at the next table? Yeah, probably. And are you going to drink the beer through your mask? Yes. Right. Well, that's interrupting our friendship. Other people are saying, I'm not wearing one of those masks. I saw somebody who had silicone gloves on and then plastic gloves over the top. And if it's not 6 feet, well, 12 feet's better than 6 feet. And so we're all behaving in the way to be obedient. But really what we need to do is break through it and be social and feel each other. So I know that lots of fear has come out of it, but fear is the worst thing for our health, really.
Yes, it is.
And so coming out of it and normalizing being human seems a little bit silly to say, but I think that's what we have to do, because by separating, there's reasons for that. All this surveillance stuff that's coming, and how they want to have the microchip and 5G and all that stuff going on. They can, if we're isolated, they can actually survey us better, but if we're all together, it's hard for them to survey us. So actually, by being close and being together, we're better off by it. And they've even said that by separating us during this, that in the next season, we won't have the immunity that we need, and so we really do technically and medically need to connect. And not in an artificial way, and not in a fear way. Oh, don't come close to me. Oh, no. Because what it does is it makes everybody the enemy.
Well, there is the other side of it too. I mean, with all sorts of things, there's always a tension between the two halves of the brain, the either ors. But if we are sheltered in place now, with a sense that we are looking out for each other. I mean, one of the things that I sent out my e-newsletter yesterday, and I wish I had the poem in front of me that I got from the COVID-19 response team from Belfast, Northern Ireland, because it's a poem that talks about how we are at this moment looking out for each other, that in the shelter of place, if we can remember that we are here because we want to prevent the pandemic from roaring out and taking out so many people, and that it's an act of sacrifice on the part of each of us who is doing this, not just for ourselves at all, but for others we will never meet, don't know. And if we get through this with that attitude, that yes, we made sacrifices, we all did, for the common good. And now the scientists will get the vaccine, we'll get the antibody tests, and we can emerge out and hug one another. We can come out of our shelter in place feeling safe again from this particular virus that taught us a lot. So it's a bit of both. There's a time to be introverted on purpose, especially if you're doing it to protect other people as well as yourself. And then there is a return and the joy of connecting, the extroverted side that we all have both sides of it. So I remain optimistic about the potential of returning to circles in which we aren't doing it virtually, but where we greet one another, and family members that have gotten to know each other much better online than they ever did before because they actually talked to one another. That I do have a very positive potential. You know, this is a liminal time from the word threshold, and when we get through this, either fear will dominate or love will have succeeded, really.
One or the other, isn't it?
Right.
Well, there's so much love being spoken about in so many places, not of course in the mainstream media, yet so many other places. And I do know love will prevail. And love of self, meaning tuning in to that inner sanctum and recognizing what is the next step that comes from inside my own rhythm.
Mm-hmm,
right now,
mm-hmm.
with the rhythm of the planet being able to breathe on her own again.
Right.
And then we tune into that center of the circle and we start to be breathed by her. Then that's the pulse of the power of the heart center in our earth, which is sustainable. And how do each one of us come from that center of our own circle and connect? And what I feel we've been taught is we've been taught to beware rather than be aware. And if we really look at our words and we pay attention that we can be human beings, not part of a race to some, predestined position, the end, deadline, what is that all about? And so it's about living and being right now. And I feel that, we've been put in our rooms in timeout and go figure it out. How when you got put in timeout, you had to figure it out a little bit yourself. What do I do? Who am I? What? And you had to do that within your inner self. And and I want to bring up the Osiris again because I feel like the different parts of Osiris being placed in different places allows that differentiation that is so important,
right,
to the individuation. And yet when we bring that individuation into the same pot, and create something that everyone enjoys, like stone soup, right? And then enjoy it with each other and grow new bodies of strength rather than anti, let's lift up.
mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of people in the circle here, and we're loving this conversation with the two of you. This is so great that you two have been able to meet and share this sacred time with us. And I'd want to bring everybody on if that's okay with you. This is a good time. And Sandy, there she is. And I'd like us to just allow a nice deep breath into our bellies and just really receive each other.
Thank you, Brenda. And thank you, Jean and Carmen. This is a very awkward position to be in, to have to stop the conversation between you and bring in others, or let's just not say stop it, let's expand it. So for everybody who is here, we've had a lot of people hang out for the whole duration of the call. Sometimes we lose people knowing it's recorded because they have to get on to their day, but this is such a priceless call. So perhaps because the two of you together are such a gift here, you really need a gift. while I'm bringing everybody into the call, perhaps you two can exchange. Let's hear from you some more. Let's just soak up your words some more if you like. And perhaps you might have some questions for one another. This time might take a minute or two. I'm going to invite everybody before you guys start. I'm going to invite everybody to take a moment, find your mute button on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen and mute yourself, please, because as I bring you in, there might be some distractions. So mute yourself. And then once you're all here, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. And then we'll hear from you. So here we go. We're going to start opening the curtain to the red tent.
So one thing that I would like to talk about and ask you. So we're talking about Jean convening in 2022, right? And you bringing women together. And one of the things that we're doing right now, as you stated, is coming all together here. And how is it that we can shift the consciousness? I am interested in that the fact that we are actually cocooning, we are actually on sabbaticals, we're actually in a inner sadhana, communing with our own selves and learning who we are. And can you speak to that in how do we shift the trajectory of conversation as we come out of our homes and recognize how this sheltering place has allowed us to have that inner communion? And how can we maybe continue that relationship with ourselves instead of always giving ourselves away, which women often give a little more?
Well, women's lives have been so busy, especially since most women work as well as are at home taking care of housekeeping and cooking and shopping and whatever, that to actually have time to be with oneself. It's like I remember when I had 2 kids, a husband, a house, a dog, and a practice, how I wished for the commute between my office and home being longer. And so I hope women especially will use this time to communicate inside and watch what comes up from inside.
Yes.
And also tap into their creativity, whatever that might be, because that becomes an expression of who they are. And I keep thinking that we all came into the world supposedly as a blank slate, but not really. And the task so much is to do what we came to do and to discover along the way what it is.
Well, I think of the word constructivism, and that's meaning-based creativity. It's a way that we can teach in school, building on what you already know, but too much of the school system has been deconstructive, critiquing something and not making anything. The one right answer hypothesis, that sort of thing. So the idea of connecting with our soul path, our passion, and our creativity is of these other values that we're discussing. And I think that if we're not able to do that, we suffer. We have a malaise. That
Absolutely.
We need to put what's inside us, outside us, through music, dance, art, something, writing, something creative, which means you've made it. Even baking a cake, for example, that we make something.
Right.
Wonderful. So Sandy, as we bring people in, do you have anyone that has a hand up or a question, or I know you're busy.
So yes, and boy, there's an awful lot of you coming in. I think there's going to be several pages of you, and this is so great. This is fun. I would like to invite you all to find at the bottom of your screen, or it might be depending on your your version of Zoom, it might be found in the little 3 dots, or if you click on your image in the little 3 dots, you will see a raised hand. I think that might be the best way to do this. So in case we don't see you, I'll get to you, I promise. But I think with a group this large, we have to do that. You know, for me to have to ask a woman not to just talk is the hardest thing, and it goes against every fiber of my feminist being. So, raise your hand button.
Catherine Rose just asked a question: how do we build our immune system?
Great, and I will find, and give me a minute to see you raising your hands while I'm bringing everybody in.
So if you would like to address that, Jean or Carmen. And I think, Carmen, you kind of mentioned it, get together.
Well, I think what hurts our immune system is fear,
yeah,
and stress. And this is stressful for everybody to have a break in routine. Even if it's positive, it's still stressful because it's different. And so there's lots of ways to build our immune system, but breathing fresh air and going for walks and being in nature and connecting with trees and animals and all that is really useful. There's all kinds of vitamins and products and things that we can take, and eating well and all of that. But to me, mostly that comes from not buying into what they say we should eat. And, you know, the center aisles of the grocery store. But we're kind of on our own, because by just being able to do what's considered, what do they call it, needed, we can't go to the chiropractor, we can't go to the massage therapist, you know. So hopefully we built our immune systems before this happened. Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you.
Well, anything that has to do with reducing stress in our lives helps our immune system, so that all the practices that involve meditation, walking in the woods if they've got woods and that sort of thing, and eating healthy foods and taking vitamins, all of this is about the physical side of the immune system. But there's also the psychological and political side of the immune system, about not buying into. This is what women's lack of self-esteem has had to do with not having an immune system that pushes away the idea that you are inferior because, or who cares about what you care about, that sort of thing. So if you can start to think for yourself and be in a circle where your ideas are supported, you are building an immune system against the criticism you grew up with. And so many women were girls who grew up in a setting in which their ideas were criticized and they were put down. And it's like an inner voice that still resonates in them when they dare to speak up now, that they have to overcome.
Is there
I appreciate that, the metaphor of that. Thank you very much, Jean.
Is there an archetype or goddess that is one of your favorites that really embodies self-acceptance? Like, just
Well,
off the top of your head, or out.
Oh, no. Well, I wrote a whole book on Artemis because it's my primary archetype, and it's called The Indomitable Spirit in Every Woman.
Right. Exactly. And so for me, that self-acceptance is to breathe into her and just completely breathe her in, and then allow her to just expand exponentially through every cell of your body, and accept that spirited being that you are. And the eyes of the physical eyes, rather than the internal opening of the eyes of the soul, you know, often is a defensive mechanism because it's sorting, right?
Right.
And it's trying to, you know, figure out what's going on outside there, instead of just opening and just saying, you know, here I am. Like
we have
children.
somebody.
Yes. Okay. So everybody is here.
Oh,
There
good.
are Yes, beautiful. And I know this is just thrills me to no end. I don't know if I'll be able to sit down for this. Please notice that you've got a little arrow on the right-hand side, middle of part of your screen where you can toggle and see all of the faces, or if you choose to hide your face, you can do that. If you choose to share your video, you can, bottom left-hand corner, you'll see share video or stop video. Donna has her hand raised, and I see then Nancy. So let's hear from Donna. Can you unmute yourself, Donna? And can we hear you?
I can. I finally got on my computer. I've been juggling with 3 different pieces of equipment, like trying to get here, but that's all right. Thank you, all of you, for being here. It's been so grand. I did put a question in the chat box a little while ago. So when what work I do is going into the world to teach people civil conversations, right? How do we speak differently to each other so we can live differently with each other? And I would ask our panelists, in the way that, so I live in northern Idaho, there's a lot of contention and a lot of political contention, and there's also a lot of racial contention up here. And so I wonder what you might offer in the way of how I can speak to men specifically. Like, I'm really curious, this has been a question for me for a long time, how do men engage in such violence at the same time that they want to be intimate and to be next to a woman and to be with and in a woman in a heterosexual kind of place? But I don't understand this like big, huge, it's just this dichotomy between the violence that masculine energy has brought, let me just say it that way instead of male, female, masculine energy, but still wanting this really loving, like I'm trying to help men figure out how to balance this violence and also intimacy in order to keep women and children, young girls and young boys, safe, specifically in a sexual manner, but also just safe, So if you guys can speak to that, that would be really great.
I remember when I was a resident in psychiatry and went to San Quentin prison, where there were circles of men who were within a year of being out into the world. And I learned that when the men were together, they could never talk about anything vulnerable because it would invite being bullied. And it goes way back to the schoolyard. Because I was a woman resident, when I came into the circle, just as a learning experience, I wasn't leading the circle, I was present. It made it possible for the men to talk about their feelings safely without being picked on for bringing up their vulnerabilities, such as being concerned about going out into the world from prison and how were they going to be with their family or their women or their whatever. Those are things that they never brought up with each other, which I found rather fascinating, how it is that men have learned not to talk about vulnerability. So it's a whole language that only with women can they bring it up. So I wonder if it's possible for men to learn how to do this.
Of course, I think it is. I want to cite 2 studies. One was newborn infants, and they took the boy babies and put them in pink blankets and the girl babies and put them in blue blankets. And they watched the behavior of people holding up the baby that they assumed, that they assumed was a girl. And what they noticed was that they held the pink blanket ones on the shoulder for longer, which gave the girls a view of what was around them that helped their brain development. And they left the boys alone for longer. So then it goes, with socialization that you shouldn't cry and, you're a sissy and all that kind of stuff. That's one study. The other one is that they looked at the brain activity of sex offenders in a jail and saw that the sex offenders had the weakest right brain and the strongest left brains, almost completely dysfunctional right brains. And of course, the corpus callosum is the thing that communicates the two. And because of this brain deficiency, because the body, psyche, spirit seeks a balance, these men were going to little girls for the right brain vulnerability activity and stealing it. And that really impacted me. So men need to understand, like you said, that vulnerability is the key, but it's been associated with wimpiness and femininity that they don't want to be associated with, but we've got to change that. And I think that is changing.
Yes. And that vulnerability is weakness, and it's not, it's actually strength.
No, that's where feminine everything comes from vulnerability. Absolutely. Feminine consciousness. And we've said it along the way that men have the feminine and women have the masculine, and what's missing is the balance.
There was a question that came across the screen earlier about, and it reminded me of it was a Korean question, but whether it's Kanan or Kuan Yin, when I wrote about the archetypes, I had to go outside of the Western culture to find a goddess of compassion. So what we're talking about vulnerability is to bring in a sense of learning about compassion, not being wimpy or something negative. Anyway, there are too many other questions that I think we should get back to.
Compassion's a big conversation around here for sure.
Yeah.
And so we'll probably have to have another call. Let's hear, okay, we have time for 2 more. We're going to ask you if you can hang out just a little bit longer. We want to be respectful of everybody's time here, and as well yours, Jean and Carmen, who it's evening in Spain. So after Nancy, we'll hear from Lizandra, and then we'll close. So thank you. You want to go ahead and mute yourself? Unmute. There you go.
Yes, thank you,
Hi.
Sandy. And Jean and Carmen, I am deep bows, and I'd give you a virtual hug here, because really I've long followed your work, and it's just a real pleasure to hear your insights. My question is, and my thought process is going toward, and Jean, I'm more of a amateur on this than certainly you are, but I was thinking about that immune question in terms of, you know, when you have organ transplants and the body's going to attack it because it's something strange and foreign, and you have this fear, and we give what to suppress that immune system is corticosteroids, right? So if we're going to, those are your fear, you're going to try to bring that down, to quiet the amygdala. Here, it's okay. That's not really happening. We're your friends. This is okay. And so in terms of stimulating our own production of inner hormonal responses to this situation, what would you have to say about that, Jean?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself, what is it that makes you peaceful inside? And for some people, it is meditation. For other people, it's listening to certain kinds of music and movement. I mean, if you get it, as soon as you get involved in the present moment because you love what you are doing, I think you are probably helping your immune system. So what is it that you do that you lose track of time, that you become just absorbed in what you are doing? Whatever it is, do it.
Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you.
And the other one?
I'm muted. I'm sorry. I've been talking. Okay, Lizandra, and then we will close. Thank you, Lizandra.
Thank you a lot. I'm really excited because I love Jean Bolen. She's a writer that I'm so excited that I can't speak. I write because English is not my language. I'm from Brazil, and I follow you at Instagram because it's a way to be close. But I want to go to some congress on something that you could that you're making around the world. I will travel to see you, and I really want to say to you that thank you for writing the goddess in because it was a fantastic book. It's really was really meaningful to me. Thank you. Just that.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
all of you.
You're welcome.
What a beautiful way to sum up a call then with gratitude. Thank you, Lysandra.
Sandy, can I mention two things?
Sure.
So Kate Trinka, the environmental segment of the Charter for Compassion, is going to be speaking with Jean about her book, Like a Tree, how trees, women and tree people can save the planet. And then also, Carmen, you are coming out with your new project. And could you tell us what that is? Because I didn't write it down tonight.
It's called The New Atlantis, and it truly is the sequel to the Pyramid Code. And when we go further back in time, it really is matriarchal and collaborative. And most people talk about the warring aspects of Atlantis and project us onto it. And I'm really pulling out the feminine collaborative aspects of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Carmen and Jean. If you'll both send me anything you would like me to add to our little report that goes out with the recording of this call, some mentions here in the chat window, and of course the recording, I'll be happy to post it. And when the Atlantis is published and ready for promotion, it would be an honor to perhaps even bring you back here and have you speak. You're both welcome. You have an open invitation. You both have my contact. Jean knows where to find me. And so we are now, let me thank all of you, express gratitude on behalf of the Charter to Brenda, also for this wonderful facilitation, and to all of you for being here, for absorbing this information and hearing it because you are ready to hear it. And that's what the world needs right now. Sarah Jamil from our task force and also in leadership of the Women and Girls sector, along with Donna, she's offered to close us today with a special little poem. And this is, by the way, this is how we roll. We are very spontaneous here at Like Women, that right? We can move on a dime.
And before she does that, I just want to invite all of you. You did come on to register. Thank you very much. Please spread the word, and please join us in the Women and Girls sector of the Charter for Compassion. We have a beautiful group of women that we work with and partners that we partner with and collaborate all throughout the world and locally. So thank you so much for being here, and we'd love to meet you more personally and hear the amazing things I know you all are doing and embodying.
Thanks, Brenda. Okay, Sarah.
Thank you, Brenda. So I actually received Jean's newsletter. So I would like to close today off with the poem that Jean was mentioning. So here we go. It's titled Love in Action. When you go out and see the empty streets, the empty stadiums, the empty train platforms, don't say to yourself, it looks like the end of the world. What you're seeing is love in action. What you're seeing in that negative space is how much we do care for each other, for our grandparents, our parents, our brothers and sisters, for people we will never meet. People will lose jobs over this. Some will lose their businesses and some will lose their lives. All the more reason to take a moment when you're out on your walk or on your way to the store or just watching the news to look into the emptiness and marvel at all of that love. Let it fill you and sustain you. It isn't the end of the world. It is the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness.
In tradition of how we close these calls, everybody unmute yourself and we'll say one big goodbye, shalom.
Bye.
Thank you. Deep gratitude.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Someone's sharing their screen.
Thank you so much.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
God bless.
Okay, everybody. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.